So, if you've been keeping up with the news lately, or own a TV, or have access to the internet, it'll come as no surprise to you that I've been looking at a lot of crowns lately. This got me thinking about the heavily adorned headpieces in fantasy, and how similar they are to the crowns worn by real-life rulers. Fantasy as a genre has a tendency to exaggerate elements of the real world. Castles, bridges, cities and statues that all seem to disregard the rules of realism. And with unconventional building methods like magic and dragonfire, fair play. But interestingly, I've always found crowns in fantasy to be on the more simple, subtle side of the spectrum, particularly when compared to the garish gem-encrusted coronets worn by the kings and queens of Europe. For example, Aragorn, or King Elisar's crown from The Lord of the Rings, the Crown of Gondor, or Silver Crown, is described as shaped like the helms of the guards of the citadel, save it was loftier, and it was all white, and the wings on either side were wrought of pearl and silver in the likeness of the wings of a seabird, for it was the emblem of the kings who came over the sea. And 7 gems of adamant were set in the circlet, and upon its summit was set a single jewel, the light of which went up like a flame. As the mathematicians watching will have already worked out, that's a grand total of 8 gems. A mere peasant sum when compared to the 2,688 diamonds, 273 pearls, 17 sapphires, 11 emeralds and 5 rubies which decorate the current imperial state crown of the United Kingdom. This version of the crown was created in 1937 for the coronation of George VI and is based on the design worn by Queen Victoria. Amongst this excessive stash of precious stones, there are 3 worth talking about, because the Stuart Sapphire is boring. The first is St. Edward's Sapphire, which dates back to before the Norman invasion in 1066 and belonged to Edward the Confessor. At this point in history, it decorated a ring which remained on the monarch's finger when he was buried in Westminster Abbey, but reportedly was removed when Edward's body was reinterred. It's unsure how the sapphire survived the Civil War, where almost all of the crown jewels were either destroyed or sold, but was added to Queen Victoria's design for the imperial state crown, in the centre of the cross on top. The second is the Cullinan II, which sounds like a weird sci-fi sequel, but is actually the second largest piece cut from the Cullinan, the largest rough diamond ever discovered. The entire gem, weighing over half a kilogram, was gifted to Edward VII and then cut into 9 smaller pieces. The largest, if you're interested, sits atop the sovereign scepter. And on the crown, the Cullinan II sits just below the Black Prince's ruby.
Can I look at this end?
Yes, certainly.
I like the Black Prince's ruby.
Me too, you Madge. The Black Prince's ruby is by far the most interesting. For starters, it's not actually a ruby, it's a sarnet. The ruby was given to the oldest son of Edward III, known as the Black Prince, by the King of Castell in return for helping him put down a rebellion. You could argue that the ruby awarded its owner luck in battle, as the Black Prince went on to earn his nickname with many notable victories during the 100 Years' War between England and France. Similarly, the ruby was part of Henry V's gem-encrusted helmet during the Battle of Agincourt. A French duke struck the king on the head with a battle axe. The blow was hard enough to have cut through the metal of the helmet, but luckily hit the ruby instead, saving Henry's life. The stone's luck seems to have worn off though by the time it was part of Richard III's helmet during the Battle of Bosworth, where the king was defeated and killed by Henry Tudor and his forces. All this history, and it is connected to just one of the many crowns in the UK royal collection. So by comparison, England's Wheel of Time parallel Andor is somewhat lacking with its singular, simple crown made of highly wrought golden roses. There is also the diadem of the daughter heir, which is a simpler version of the Rose Crown, albeit with just the one flower on a slim golden band. You could compare this to the coronet of the Prince of Wales, which is worn by the first in line to the English throne. It is also a more simplified version of the imperial state crown, with only one arch to symbolise the lower ranking of the prince. But again, there are many versions worn by different princes over the decades. Of course, the most iconic crown from the Wheel of Time is the Crown of Swords. It's even got a whole book named after it. Worn by the King of Ilion, it was originally called the Laurel Crown, but was renamed by Randall Thor, the Dragon Reborn, because of the small swords hidden amongst the laurel leaves. The design is supposed to make us think of laurel wreaths, which were worn by ancient Greeks and Romans as a symbol of triumph and associated with the Greek god Apollo. According to legend, Apollo was in love with a nymph called Daphne. In a sadly relatable twist, the Olympians' feelings were not reciprocated. And to save herself from Apollo's lust, Daphne had a river god turn her into a laurel tree. And a heartbroken Apollo used the leaves and branches to make himself a crown. Similarly to Roman commanders and emperors, the laurel crown could be a symbol of Rand's military victory over Samael for control of Ilion. But with all that said, there is an even more obvious parallel, as the hidden swords are supposed to make us think of the crown of thorns worn by Jesus during the crucifixion. This is just one of the many, many connections between Rand and Jesus that Robert Jordan not so subtly included, but importantly does contribute to the impression that being the chosen one and the responsibility that comes with that is more of a burden than a gift. And this brings me to the reason why I believe crowns in fantasy are never quite as over the top as they are in reality. I mean, just look at the crown of St. Wenceslas in Prague. It looks like something you'd be given free with a kid's meal at Burger King. Rather than just exhibiting the wealth and status of a ruler, crowns in fantasy serve a far more important storytelling function, giving us details and information about the character that wears them. A great example of this are the crowns worn by the Targaryen Kings in A Song of Ice and Fire. Looking at the first four named Aegon, Aegon the Conqueror wore a crown of Valyrian steel instead of gold, set with rubies, which makes us associate him with war and blood. It's no coincidence then that this crown was also worn by Aegon II, a king whose entire reign was spent fighting a civil war against his stepsister Rhaenyra called the Dance of the Dragons. And spoilers for House of the Dragon if you haven't read Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra's son Aegon III becomes king after his uncle's death at just 10 years old. Having been exposed to the horrors of war at such a young age, even witnessing his mother being fed to a dragon, Aegon III is understandably a pretty morbid ruler. And this is reflected in his simple crown, an unornamented thin circlet of plain gold. At the other end of the spectrum is Aegon IV, whose crown is probably the most elaborate of all the Targaryen kings. A heavy rose gold headpiece, each point intricately carved into the likeness of a dragon's head with gemstones for eyes. As the pattern would suggest, Aegon IV is remembered as a gluttonous, irresponsible king whose indulgences directly led to the second Targaryen civil war, the Blackfyre Rebellion. So, if you can think of any other crowns from fantasy that support this storytelling theory, then please let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the channel for more fantasy content like this. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.